The moment the accusation surfaced, the room changed in a way that was almost physical, as if the air itself had turned heavy. What had begun as a formal ceremony filled with polite applause and respectful murmurs suddenly became a stage for doubt and suspicion. Eyes that had moments ago held admiration now narrowed with curiosity, then skepticism. Someone in the crowd whispered first, quietly enough to seem harmless, but loud enough to plant a seed. The medals on her chest, they said, didn't look right, too many, too prestigious, too unlikely for someone like her. The whisper spread, growing bolder with each repetition, until it no longer hid behind hushed tones. Soon, the murmurs turned into open comments. A man near the front folded his arms and shook his head, loudly questioning how someone of her rank could have earned such honors. Another scoffed, suggesting that the medals must be replicas, props borrowed to inflate a story that wasn't real. Each remark landed like a small strike, not physically painful, but sharp enough to cut into her dignity. The audience, once unified in respect, fractured into two groups: those unsure what to believe, and those already convinced she was lying. Officials on the stage exchanged uneasy glances. No one immediately stepped in to stop it. The absence of authority gave the accusations room to grow. A senior organizer finally spoke, not to defend her, but to ask for clarification. That single word was enough to legitimize the doubt. Cameras zoomed in on her medals, lenses searching for flaws, as if metal and ribbon could confess to deception. The spotlight, meant to honor her, now felt like an interrogation lamp. For her, the humiliation was public and relentless. She stood alone, the target of every stare, her achievements reduced to a spectacle. The medals she wore were not decorations to her. Each one carried memories of sacrifice, loss, and moments when survival itself had been uncertain. Yet now, strangers dismissed them with casual arrogance. What hurt most was not the insult, but the certainty in their voices, the confidence with which they erased her past without knowing a single detail of it. Still, she did not speak. She did not raise her voice or attempt to defend herself with stories or documents. Her silence was misinterpreted as guilt. The crowd leaned further into judgment, mistaking restraint for weakness. A few even smiled, satisfied that they had exposed a fraud. The narrative was forming quickly, and it was not in her favor. In those minutes, respect collapsed into ridicule. Honor turned into suspicion. The stage that should have celebrated service became a courtroom without rules, and she stood there as the accused, stripped of credibility in the eyes of many. The claim that her medals were lies had taken hold, and for the first time, it seemed possible that the truth might never matter at all. While the noise around her grew louder, she remained still, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. It was not the kind of silence born from fear or confusion, but the practiced quiet of someone who had learned long ago that not every battle was meant to be fought with words. She kept her hands at her sides, fingers relaxed, shoulders squared, as if she were standing inspection rather than facing a room full of doubters. To those watching closely, there was something unsettling about her composure. People who lie usually rush to explain themselves. People who are cornered often panic. She did neither. Her eyes did not dart around the room looking for support. They stayed forward, steady, unblinking. In that stillness was a kind of discipline that could not be faked. It was the same discipline that had carried her through exhaustion, fear, and moments when hesitation could have cost lives. But the crowd did not know that. All they saw was a woman refusing to defend herself, and many took that as confirmation of their suspicions. They mistook control for surrender. Inside her, memories surfaced uninvited. Not speeches or certificates, but faces. Teammates who never made it home. Long nights where sleep was a luxury and silence meant survival. Moments when recognition was the last thing on anyone's mind because simply enduring was the goal. Compared to those experiences, this humiliation, as sharp as it was, felt strangely familiar. She had learned that endurance did not always look heroic. Sometimes it looked like standing still, while others misunderstood you completely. A few people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Her calm was beginning to contrast sharply with the aggression of her accusers. The louder they became, the more controlled she appeared. There was no anger in her face, no bitterness, only patience. It was the patience of someone who trusted the truth, even when the truth was temporarily buried under noise and ego. She knew that explaining herself would cheapen what she had earned. Her record did not need her voice to validate it. One official tried to prompt her to respond, suggesting she clear things up. She met his gaze briefly, then looked forward again, choosing restraint over reaction. That choice frustrated some and intrigued others. It forced the room to sit with its own behavior. Without her feeding the conflict, the accusations began to sound harsher, more exposed. Every insult echoed longer than intended, revealing more about the speaker than about her. Her silence was not passive. It was deliberate. It was strength without spectacle. In a world that often demands instant explanations and emotional displays, she offered neither. She embodied the quiet confidence of someone who had already proven herself in places far removed from stages and ceremonies. Whether these people believed her or not did not change what she had done or who she was. As the tension stretched on, something subtle began to shift. Doubt crept into the certainty of the loudest critics, not doubt about her medals, but doubt about their own judgment. Her silence had become a mirror, reflecting their impatience, their need to feel powerful by tearing someone down. And in that reflection, the truth was beginning to press forward, waiting for the right moment to be seen. As the minutes passed, the imbalance of power in the room became impossible to ignore. Those questioning her felt emboldened, not because they had evidence, but because no one with real authority had stepped in to stop them. The officials nearby spoke in careful tones, choosing neutrality over justice, as if staying detached absolved them of responsibility. Their hesitation sent a clear message to the crowd. The accusations were allowed to continue. In that vacuum of leadership, confidence shifted away from the woman being accused and toward those who were loudest. The critics grew sharper, more comfortable in their assumptions. One voice claimed the medals were too rare, too significant to belong to someone standing so quietly. Another implied favoritism, suggesting the honors were handed out as a gesture rather than earned in hardship. Each comment leaned on social hierarchies, on the unspoken belief that certain people simply did not fit the image of decorated heroes. The accusations were no longer about metal and ribbons. They were about identity, about who deserved respect and who did not. Security personnel stood at ease, watching rather than intervening. Their presence, meant to convey order, instead reinforced the sense that the accusers were safe, protected by the system itself. The woman at the center of it all remained alone, unsupported, facing not just individuals but an environment stacked against her. It was clear now that the truth, no matter how solid, could be drowned out by collective doubt when power chose silence. A senior administrator finally spoke again, his tone firm but detached. He suggested that the situation would be reviewed later, implying that the ceremony should move on. To many, this sounded like a quiet dismissal of her honor. Review later meant uncertainty now, and uncertainty fed suspicion. The suggestion planted the idea that maybe the accusations had merit after all. The crowd absorbed this cue quickly, and the whispers returned, louder and more confident than before. She stood there, listening, understanding the shift better than anyone else. She had seen this kind of imbalance before, though in very different settings. It was the moment when those with influence believed they controlled the outcome, when they assumed the person in front of them had no leverage left. The same pattern repeated itself, pressure applied from all sides, designed to make someone break, confess, or retreat. But she did not retreat. The tension stretched thin, uncomfortable, and unresolved. The ceremony had lost all structure, hanging in an awkward pause where no one quite knew what should happen next. Some people avoided eye contact, sensing that something was wrong but unwilling to challenge it. Others leaned forward, eager to see how far this would go. The atmosphere felt less like a public event and more like a test, one not of her character, but of the room itself. It was in this uneasy stillness that the assumption took hold, that the truth might never surface, that the accusations, once spoken, were enough to permanently stain her reputation. Those who felt powerful believed they had already won simply by casting doubt. They did not realize that this moment where authority seemed one-sided and justice absent was only the peak of the imbalance, not the conclusion. Unseen by them, forces far beyond this room were already in motion, preparing to shift everything they thought they controlled. The shift came without warning, announced not by words but by movement. At the back of the room, where attention had long since drifted away, doors opened and a sudden stillness spread outward like a ripple. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Heads turned instinctively, not out of curiosity, but recognition. The presence entering the hall carried a weight that required no introduction. Security straightened. Officials who had moments ago seemed uncertain now moved with urgency. The atmosphere, once chaotic and judgmental, snapped into rigid order. The president stepped inside. What seconds earlier had felt like a public tribunal dissolved instantly into silence. The same voices that had been confident and sharp fell quiet, their certainty evaporating. Some stood without realizing it, others froze where they were, caught halfway between arrogance and disbelief. No one questioned why the most powerful authority in the room had arrived. His presence alone reframed everything that had happened. This was no longer a matter of opinion or rumor. This was now a matter of record, of national consequence. He did not rush. His steps were measured, deliberate, as if he were allowing the room to absorb the gravity of his arrival. His gaze swept across the audience, not accusatory but observant. It lingered briefly on the officials, then on the crowd, and finally settled on her. For the first time since the accusations began, she was no longer alone. The imbalance that had defined the room cracked in that instant. Whispers tried to return, but they died quickly, choked by unease. People began to realize the implications of what they had participated in. Accusations made so freely now felt dangerous, even shameful. The same crowd that had demanded proof moments earlier now avoided eye contact, suddenly aware of how exposed they were. Authority had entered, and with it, accountability. The president stopped near the stage, no speech yet. No explanation, just presence. That restraint was powerful. It forced everyone to sit with their own actions. The officials who had deferred responsibility earlier now looked visibly unsettled, aware that neutrality would no longer protect them. The room understood, collectively, that the truth was about to surface, and that it would not be negotiable. She remained composed, just as she had before, but something subtle shifted. It was not relief or triumph, but recognition. She acknowledged him with a respectful nod, nothing more. There was no need for dramatics. This moment was not about emotion. It was about validation. The highest authority in the country had arrived not by coincidence, but by purpose. The tension transformed. What had once been hostile became anticipatory. People leaned forward, not eager to judge anymore, but anxious to witness what was coming. The narrative they had built so confidently was unraveling in real time. Every second of silence deepened their discomfort. In that pause, the power structure reversed completely. The critics were no longer in control of the story. The officials were no longer able to delay or deflect. And she, who had been treated as an accused impostor minutes earlier, now stood at the center of an unfolding revelation. The president's arrival did not just change the room. It sealed the fate of every false claim spoken within it. When the truth finally came, it did not arrive as a dramatic argument or an emotional plea. It arrived as fact, clean, undeniable, and devastating to every false assumption that had filled the room. The president spoke calmly, his voice steady, carrying the authority of records verified, missions logged, and sacrifices documented beyond question. He did not embellish. He did not need to. Each sentence dismantled the accusations piece by piece, turning whispers into liabilities and confidence into regret. He confirmed her service first, naming units and operations with precision that could not be improvised. Dates, locations, and outcomes followed, forming a timeline so clear that doubt had nowhere left to hide. Then he addressed the medals, not as objects, but as acknowledgments of moments when lives were saved, objectives secured, and risks taken that most people would never fully understand. The medals were not excessive. If anything, they were incomplete representations of what she had endured. As the truth settled in, the room changed again, this time inwardly. Faces that had once shown suspicion now reflected shock. Some people lowered their heads. Others stared at her, not with curiosity anymore, but with a dawning awareness of their own mistake. The arrogance that had fueled the accusations collapsed under the weight of reality. No one interrupted. No one challenged a word. The authority of truth had replaced the noise of opinion. The president turned to her then, acknowledging her directly. He spoke of integrity under pressure, of restraint in the face of injustice, of service that does not demand recognition. In doing so, he elevated her beyond defense. She was no longer someone whose honor needed protecting. She was a standard by which honor was measured. The silence that followed was not empty, it was reverent. Those who had accused her felt exposed. Their earlier certainty now read as recklessness. There were no apologies spoken aloud, but they lingered unspoken in every avoided glance and stiff posture. The officials who had hesitated earlier stood rigid, aware that their failure to act had been witnessed and implicitly judged. Neutrality, once comfortable, now felt like complicity. She did not smile. She did not seek eye contact. Vindication did not change her posture or her expression. She accepted the truth as she had accepted everything else, with quiet dignity. The medals on her chest had not changed, but the meaning projected onto them had transformed completely. What had been mocked minutes earlier now commanded respect. As the event concluded, the story reversed itself fully. The narrative was no longer about false medals, but about the danger of arrogance and the cost of judging without understanding. The stunned silence followed her as she stepped away, not because she demanded it, but because the room had learned something it could not unlearn. The truth had not just defended her, it had revealed everyone else. And in that revelation, honor found its place again, not in applause or ceremony, but in the undeniable weight of facts finally spoken aloud.